Now that the re-gear is actually completed, I wanted to do a little more of a voiceover talking about the pinion depth tool. The tool that you see in my left hand, I end up screwing it on just hand tight, when later on I end up finding out that I should have probably used the dial inch-pound torque wrench and tighten this thing anywhere between 15 and 30 inch-pounds of rotational force. By doing that, it would have been the correct preload, and I believe that the starting pinion depth shims would have been a whole lot more accurate, closer to my final pinion shim depth. The tool, as used, I end up starting off, I believe, at about 52, 53 thousandths is what my pinion depth was supposed to be starting at, where my final depth ended up being like 64 thousandths. So next time when I do the Dana 30, I'll be sure to make sure that I actually use a dial inch-pound torque wrench and torque that to 15 to 30 to see if it's possibly more accurate. I think it is more accurate. I think it's just my mess up. So the book didn't really talk about how to do this. It was kind of vague. Now, these bearing caps, it did say in the book using the tool to torque them down to 30 foot-pounds of torque, and that's what I end up doing here.
To try and explain, I've tried to explain it before, and I know it's probably misunderstood a lot. So you're basically taking this piece here, you're raising this up, and you're wanting to just do your best to kind of hold this on there steady and kind of zero it out. I know I'm still a little bit wobbly, but I went ahead and put it on 0 there. So what I do is I kind of just hold it there, I move on over, and it starts to go up. So I'm already starting to hit that round curvature part of it. So as it goes up, it goes to 50, 40, 50, 51, 52, 53, and it's kind of almost 53, and it, let's see if I turn my head sideways. It's like it's almost reading 53. It's almost between 52 and 53. So as it goes to 50, I should say, as it goes to 53, I go past it, it goes down. So I know that's at the highest point. So I think it's gonna read almost 53 there. It's, like I said, it's kind of in between. I'm gonna start off with 53,000 shim, if I'm reading this correct. I do want to go ahead and say, and I don't know if I've already said it or not, the bearings that I'm using are Timken bearings, Timken races. Now, there's this inner bearing right in there. I'm actually going to remove it tomorrow, and I'm going to grind it out, and I'm going to make that one bearing my setup bearing. So remember this. If you use setup bearings, it's fine. Make sure your final bearings are exactly the same as your setup bearings. So if you use Timken bearings, Timken races, use obviously Timken bearing for your setup bearings. Don't use a whole different brand, because my understanding the spec is slightly different. I've already washed the housing, driven the new races, which I don't believe I've shown y'all. I did show you the pinion depth tool, so I've learned where I need to start with my pinion shims. And what the tool has shown me, it has showed me that I need to start off with at least 52 thousandths in the shims. I think I said 53 last time, but taking a closer look, it's actually 52 thousandths. I have followed and watched a lot of videos of the guy by the name, by the channel of the BFH Garage, and he talks about labeling every single one of these shims. Here I have a 30 thousandths, 5 thousandths, 3 thousandths, 10 thousandths, everything I can just to get to the 52 thousandths mark. Now, what I've learned is measuring each one of these shims, you know, it's not going to read exactly 5 thousandths. Some of them do read 5 thousandths. Some of them will read maybe 4 thousandths, or between 2 thousandths and 3 thousandths. So you can kind of play with the different shims there and kind of get to where your starting mark is if you're using a pinion depth tool like I did. Hopefully this thing will be dead on or really, really close. So last weekend, what I did was, what everyone else does, I made some setup bearings. So I made my setup bearing. My setup bearing is going to be able to slide on and slide off, which I kind of messed up. This thing is actually a little too loose in my opinion. It shouldn't be this loose. It should just kind of barely slide on, but it is what it is. So I've watched lots of videos. Like I said, the BFH Garage he regeared a Jeep Wrangler LJ. This axle came out of an '06 LJ. I had a lot of problems trying to figure out the orientation of how the parts go on the pinion because this axle had no pinion. I believe what this is an oil slinger. The way it was explained to me, this thing did not have one. Now, you can add this oil slinger if you want, but you got to add this, figure this into the rest of the thickness of your pinion shims. So this would actually go on here first, and then you would add your shims, you know, whatever this thickness was. I think this is 30 thousandths is what it read. So I'd have to add whatever shims next to get the 52 thousandths. But I'm not going to use it because I'm pretty sure it didn't come with it. Here's my shims. Let's see, I got 30, 35, 35, what is that, 40, 53. So I'm going to go ahead and stack these on up here, slide this bearing on here, and then I'm going to have to get it into the housing. I'm not going to worry about my pinion. I'm sorry, this is the pinion preload shims that would go on here. I'm not going to worry. All I'm trying to get is the depth going in and out of the pinion, trying to figure out and get its correct mesh. I want my pattern to be in the middle. So after this part here, after this bearing does get put on, from my understanding, this is another oil slinger. You actually put that there. I'm not going to put the seal in. That's only going to be for final assembly. Once this is in there, I'm going to slide the yoke on top of it. I'll put my washer, and then I'll put my nut on. I've just put some oil on my finger and on the race. I'm just really trying to really lube up the race there. And I'll make sure the bearings have plenty of oil because I don't want to put them in dry.
So I had just finished making the inner pinion bearing as a setup bearing. I ended up learning later on that I was having a lot of trouble getting this thing to come back apart. I ended up making a setup bearing for the outer bearing here, but you don't need to do that. What I learned from someone else was, after many times of taking this thing apart, you can use some grease. And I'm not talking about gear oil. You need to use grease. I ended up using white lithium grease and smear that on the inner part of the outer pinion bearing, which you'll see me here install in a second right there. And whenever you do that using the white lithium grease, you can get this thing back apart. Before, I really struggled disassembling it, but because you use grease on that inner bearing, you won't have such a problem getting it take it apart. So you really don't even need to make that that outer bearing there. You don't even really need to make that as a setup bearing. As long as you use grease, you can get it back apart within 5 to 6 good blows with a 4-pound hammer and a punch that you use at the center of that pinion. Now make sure you screw on that setup pinion nut before you end up hammering on it with that punch so you don't damage the threads. Later on, I end up using a electric screwdriver, or I'm sorry, electric impact nut driver, I guess it would be called, because it was a lot more gentle than using this big air impact gun. What I learned at a later date, I didn't learn it here, which is once you tighten this nut, you're just trying to add pinion bearing preload. But to achieve the correct amount of pinion bearing preload, you want to get out your dial inch-pound torque wrench, and you want to torque that nut till it reads anywhere from 15 to 30 inch-pounds of rotational force. Do not go over 30 inch-pounds of rotational force or you will damage those bearings. But by doing 15 to 30, you'll have the correct amount of preload to find the correct pattern. You'll see here in a second after I finished tightening this up with this impact, it is way, way too loose. I'm thinking at the time that it's enough drag, but it's nowhere near enough drag. Make sure you tighten this thing, as I'll say again, 15 to 30 inch-pounds of rotational force with that dial inch-pound torque wrench. If I had only known that I should have been at 15 to 30, I wouldn't have had to take this thing apart 8 or 9 times because it was to the point where, wow, if someone had just told me that simple little tool there, or simple amount of preload, how to measure it, I would not have gone through so much frustration. I probably would have re-geared this in a day. So it was at this point here I just lowered the ring gear and the limit. It slid down into the housing. I thought, well, what the heck, I'll just kind of do what everyone else does and see if I can't use the original carrier shims. I was able to get the right side in, which is the passenger side. By moving the race over, I was able to slide in the passenger side. And then I tried to slide in the driver's side, realizing it was quite thick. And it was at this point I said, nah, I don't want to damage these shims or anything like that. I ought to just go ahead and yank this thing on out and do it the right way. Now, a lot of people don't use the case spreaders, but after I kind of got the hang of it, sure, it was one more step I had to take, but it was so much easier using the case spreader. I definitely recommend it, especially not really knowing anything. You don't want to damage the case. I definitely kind of feel it's a little bit safer.
All right, so the book says to not spread the housing from here to here. Do not spread it more than 20 thousandths. I actually had someone on a forum, I'm not going to say their name, but they said don't go over 15 thousandths. I'm going to stick with 15 thousandths. If it'll slip in at 15 thousandths, then there's no reason to go further. The book is saying, and I'm going to show you right here. I hope it'll come in. Caution: do not spread over 20 thousandths of an inch. If the housing is overspread, it could be distorted or damaged. And this is for the Dana 44. This book shows how to rebuild a 30, 35, and a 44, and this is for the 44. So, I'm going to make sure that thing's on 0. Alright, we're on 0. So, I'm going to go to tightening.
I end up holding on each side of the bearing races so they don't fall out as I lower the carrier into the housing here. But what I kind of learned is if I take my left hand and hold onto the ring gear and just kind of rotate it on an angle and using gravity to hold that race, and then I can use my right hand to hold the other race and slowly kind of drop it in without losing the races. I'm actually taking the flathead screwdriver here and kind of pushing it off to the side so I can slide in the original carrier shims.
I don't know if I went over. There's actually a punch mark here, punch mark, 2 punch marks, and 2 punch marks there. The BFH garage, he talks about that. You want to make sure you put the correct bearing on each side. And he even talks about, which, I watched this video several times. I'll take this one back off and I'll show it to you. Where I couldn't tell if this one was upside down or which way, because it technically came out the housing like that. There's a BB, that's a BD, and there's a BD over here. It came out the housing like that. So I didn't know which way it's supposed to go. And the way he showed me was if you see the machine mark, I don't know if you can see it, a little discoloration there. At that machine mark you see, he said that would go towards the inside. I don't really know. I think so. It just kind of seems like it where it sits. So, and also those 2 dots there are closest right here. So if I flipped it around, those dots would be further down, those punch marks. Now there's a K here and a K here. So if the K was facing this way, on the cap here, there should be a K. Same thing. If there's a K over here, the K should be this way. But this one didn't have it. And I believe Mike on the BFH garage, I believe he actually talked about that, where he did one housing and I don't think there were any marks, and he made his own punch marks. So that's something you want to make sure. If you take this thing out, you look real close. Make sure there is correct marks so you know which side these caps go on. So I just got these finger tight. I know I got movement in there. Tighten these down, and of course I'm gonna release this. I'm gonna tighten the bearing caps down to what the book tells me, and I'm gonna paint 3 teeth and spin this thing around, and I want to get a pattern. Mike on BFH Garage, he talks about taking a welding glove, folding it up a couple times. I don't know if I got a decent clean one, and to basically put it on here and get good drag. And the reason you want to get good drag as you're spinning the nut or the yoke at a high rate of speed, I'll probably do it with the 3/8 drive impact gun, putting a good amount of pressure here. Don't suck up your glove or suck up your fingers, but put a good amount of pressure so you have a good mesh, a good gear teeth mesh to get a good pattern there, so you can see it really good. And that's where I'm at. I'm trying to figure out if my depth is correct with the pinion shims, or if I need to remove some pinion shims or add more to get the correct depth. So that's where I'm at. Forgot to hit the GoPro there, play it. So I'm cranking these down to 50 foot-pounds first. Kind of doing it in stages. Then I'm gonna run it up to 80, because that's what the book says. The book says to torque them at 80 foot-pounds of torque. The whole time I want to make sure that those turn. I know this is not exactly the right fixture to be using, but it is what it is. I might have to set it up differently because it kind of shakes too much. Okay. So the idea is to paint 3 teeth. This thing's so shaky. Really dying to know what the dial indicator shows. But anyway, we're gonna go paint the teeth and go from there. See what our pattern shows.
When I apply my marking compound here, I end up following the instructions of someone else on YouTube where they actually diluted this with gear oil. I mean, in some ways it does kind of help, so it doesn't, I guess it doesn't leave the brush marks. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't do this again, because later on I found out this was quite messy because I've taken this thing apart so many times to try and get it right. So I actually advise you, don't even dilute this stuff down. However it comes out the tube, you know, it's going to be extremely thick, and just paint that stuff on. Because if you're new like me and this is your first re-gear, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to take brake cleaner and clean off that gear, because it's almost going to give you a false pattern because this marking compound has been so diluted so much. So put this stuff on directly out the tube and don't bother with diluting it. So I've put the glove here on the ring gear as I spin this thing around to add drag or resistance. You want to do this so you can get a good pattern whenever you finish spinning it around each time. If you don't add the glove, what it is you're not going to pick up a good pattern. It's going to kind of give you a thrown off, like off pattern. You're not going to have a good visual pattern in each one of those teeth. Now coming up here, I'm actually going to be showing you what the pattern looks like after I've spun this, and I've actually grabbed the book to try and figure out what these patterns are supposed to look like. So what you're looking at right now is the drive side of the tooth. The back side of that tooth is called the co-side. The outer part of the ring gear is called your heel, and the inner part of the ring gear is called your toe, is on the tooth. So what you're trying to do on the drive side and the co-side, you're trying to get it in the center. Actually, we're not even going to worry about the co-side. All we're trying to focus right now is your drive side. You're trying to get that pattern in the middle, and to achieve that is what you do with pinion depth. That's playing with the shims. The co-side can be fixed with correcting with which is loosening up and tightening up backlash. So at this point, I'm looking at the book trying to figure out what this pattern is supposed to be. The 2 top pictures on the left will show you drive side and co-side. That is the most perfect pattern, but you're really never going to get that exact pattern because all these gear manufacturers cut a little bit different. Some of them have better qualities than others. The 8 pictures below the 2 at the top there, it basically is showing you if you are too deep in your pattern or you're not deep enough, meaning you need to add pinion depth shims or you need to take pinion depth shims away, and that's basically what this is explaining. So really don't go by this book, or I should say you can go by this book as a little bit of a reference, but a lot of the books that come with these gears, the patterns that they show as an acceptable pattern are just all over the place, which is just pure insanity. But like I said, you're just trying to get it so that pattern is in between the heel and the toe, and basically depth wise, I guess from shallow to too deep, you're trying to get again that little oval looking pattern kind of in the center there. And like I said, don't worry about the co-side. Once you have your pinion depth, then you achieve the co-side by tightening up or loosening up the backlash. And again, sometimes you're not going to get that co-side exactly in the middle. My final pattern was not exactly in the middle for the co-side. It's just the way it fell out. It's just due to the manufacturer of the gears not being very, very good quality. Even though they're supposed to be a good quality company, it turns out they've kind of gone downhill. So after we checked our pattern, we kind of saw where our pattern was at. We know it's not really that great. I knew I had to add more shims for more depth. I decided to go ahead and throw the dial indicator on here and just see what my backlash was. Now, I couldn't really feel what the backlash was. As I was spinning it, you'll see the dial indicator kind of spins all the way around. That's because I didn't have enough pinion bearing preload. That's why it was so important for me to do a voiceover and explain to you all how pinion bearing preload should be set up before you even start putting the ring gear in and searching for your pattern. And it was at this point I was like, no, just something's just not right here. All because of pinion bearing preload was not exactly explained to me. It took me probably 15 to 20 times taking this thing apart to try and understand what is going on. If pinion bearing preload was explained, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in now. And I'm not going to bore you with all the times I've taken this thing back apart. I'll have to do a part 2 of where the final pattern is at right now. And so please stay tuned to that.